Yeah, exactly. So we've done Spain, we've done Italy. Now, what's the news from Germany? Bad news, I hear.
Yes, it is bad news, and I'll get to that quickly. And then I want to focus on one little bright spot because I think the one little bright spot might be especially interesting to people who are interested in thinking about specifically the relationship between trans politics and the left. So let's start with the bad news. The bad news is that Germany just had an election. In first place came a quite right wing center right, led by a very old, very conservative, both fiscally and socially man. In second place came
Mhm.
a far right party with many openly fascist personalities and elements with 20% of the vote, which is a terrifyingly high percentage. The once proud German Social Democratic Party got 15% of the vote, which is
Oh my
astonishingly,
God.
astonishingly,
Mm.
astonishingly terrible after having just governed for the past few years, probably foreshadowing of what will happen in the UK. It was a similar loveless win, and they did nothing in their time in power to make anyone love them even more. The Greens came in a little bit below that. And then the big surprise at the election, because everyone came in basically exactly where they'd been polling for the past 6 to 8 months, was the left party, Die Linke, which, full disclosure, I'm a member. And Die Linke was able to triple its pre election polling and go from 3% in the polls and 4.9% in the last election to just about 9% in this election. Now, the really impressive thing is that it did that while also shedding itself of many of its worst elements. And I think the lessons here are both inspiring and also important to learn. So, Die Linke is a complicated party. It descends from the merger of the kind of pro reformist rump of the old East German governing party and the left wing of the Social Democratic Party, which walked out of the Social Democrats in the early 2000s when the Social Democrats pushed through Blairite social reforms and horrible cuts to long term unemployment in Germany. They kind of created the low wage sector, 0 hour contracts, stuff like that. All of that was brought in by Social Democrats. The party has always been a bit divided. The party has always had a declining membership of people from the former East who have been slowly dying and not being replaced. And there's been just a lot of divides in the party that have always stopped it from being kind of a coherent political force. And this time around, a lot of those divides managed to resolve themselves, I think mostly because the party looked like it was in such a terrible place. And then because they were able to fight back and win, I think now the forces that have taken control of it are quite good and may actually portend some good things for the state of the German left, which is not a good thing, not
Mm.
a thing I thought I'd be able to say at any point in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the bits that split off and why they're weird. On the one hand, you had a woman who had been one of the party's most prominent elected officials named Sarah Wagenknecht. And she originated in actually the pro-Stalinist rump of the reformist post-socialist party of the 90s. So she started out as a
East Germany.
hardcore East German communist who would say things like, I am so angry about 1990 because it took my country and my future away from me. Like a very pro-East persona. She then, when the left wing of the Social Democrats walked out and joined Die Linke, partnered with, both politically and personally, a much older man named Oscar Lafontaine, who was the sort of biggest deal Social Democrat to walk, and began to moderate significantly and to adopt what I might call Michael Walkerism, if I wanted to be mean, where
Okay.
basically you attempt to activate. The theory is that out there in the voter base, there is a
Is
supermajority for redistributive policy, which you will activate by being quote unquote normal, i.e.,
right.
bigoted, about trans people, about migration, and about all of these sort of social issues. And that if you just act quote unquote normal, if you just cater to the right on those issues, then you can cut off the far right at its knees because all of the people who are voting for the far right would rather vote for a redistributive, conservative social democratic project. Blue labor, basically.
Right. But in Germany, I'm right in saying that the fascist, sorry, the far right party. I think legally in Germany, and that's where you live. I have to say
Yes,
that the far right
you
party
do.
is not socially redistributive. It's
No, it's not. And that was
more
the
libertarian concept.
yes, and the one single solitary point that Wagenknecht had was that it is important to aggressively raise that when talking about them, and
Mhm.
not just say that they're scary because they're far right, but to also say, and they want you to have no minimum wage. They want you
Yeah,
to have no rent control. Like they want to eliminate all of this stuff. And the economic program of that party is unbelievably unpopular. And basically no one who votes for it knows what's in it. It's
yeah.
very, very much not what they run on. It's very funny. So she left the party with this theory. And for a while, she was polling at 10%, and Die Linke was polling at 3%. And this was going to be the kind of great, glorious victory of the anti woke left. And then, as it turns out, people who want social redistribution and socialism would rather have the original. And people who hate trans people and make their vote based on wanting less migration would also rather have the original.
Mhm.
And what happened was Die Linke shed of that, and also shed, I have to say, in Berlin, where it was always a pretty significant governing force, of some people in the party who walked out because supposedly it was too anti-Semitic. They walked out of the party because the party refused to say that Hamas was as bad as the Nazis, right? I have no interest in being a member of either Hamas or the Nazi party, but I know which one I think is worse and more anti-Semitic, right?
Mhm.
But anyway, a bunch of those people also walked out, I think thinking the party would be dead soon anyway. So you suddenly had a party that was free to campaign on the following. One, aggressively making the main theme a nationwide rent cap and offering a bunch of counseling about, is your rent bill too high? Is your heating bill illegally high? We'll help you with all this stuff. Two, being unapologetically pro-queer and pro-trans. So in Berlin, they had posters up saying trans people exist, billionaires shouldn't. And on the flip side was a picture of a leather man with two pups on leashes. And the headline was "A kennel for every bitch, rent caps now."
Oh my God. I mean, I'd vote for them, but I don't regard myself as the sort of majoritarian political subject.
In Berlin,